Fresh meat.
Nobody trusts anybody anymore on today's episode of Playing with Fear. Welcome to JoBlo Horror Videos Playing with Fear, where we take a look at some of the landmark horror titles throughout the history of gaming. Today's episode is another roll of the dice with a licensed property with a slight change. Today's game is the one and only entry for this property, and is somewhat lost to time. The Thing, based on the John Carpenter 80s classic, is not perfect, but if you love the movie or obscure horror games, then it's well worth your time. For some people, John Carpenter is on the Mount Rushmore of horror directors. He unleashed Halloween, which really jump-started the slasher boom of the 80s. He gave us They Live, Prince of Darkness, Christine, The Fog, Escape from New York, and many, many other great pieces of sci-fi and horror art. The Thing, although maligned upon its release, has become one of the most beloved horror films of all time. It is in fact my personal favorite horror film, and I don't ever see that being dethroned. The Thing is also a remake, or reimagining of sorts, to the 1950s classic The Thing from Another World. That film itself is based on the novella Who Goes There, written by John W. Campbell and published in 1948. This is an important designation because while Howard Hawks' film is based on the story, it's about as loosely based as you can get. That film was a great watch though, especially to get younger viewers into the horror genre after they've made it through the Universal classics. Released in 1982, The Thing follows the men of U.S. Outpost No. 31, after they take in a rescue dog being stalked by two Norwegians who've appeared to go crazy. Those crazy Swedes. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. Like, now. And then also watch our deconstructing horror video on it as well. All good? You back? You ready? Great. The movie abandons the atomic age fears of the black and white original in favor of following the dread and paranoia of the novella. Its acting, score, special effects, cinematography, everything is just top-notch. While the film performed poorly at the time of its release, no doubt due to the summer having killer films like Poltergeist, Tron, Star Trek II, and the much friendlier alien film in E.T., the movie has gone on to legendary status and spawned comic books, detailed toys, a could-have-been great prequel, a lovingly made board game, and today's subject, 2002's out-of-nowhere video game, The Thing. Back in 2000, Universal Interactive had already been a prominent name in the gaming industry with their partnerships with both Naughty Dog and Insomniac Games on two of the biggest franchises of the late 90s, Spyro and Crash Bandicoot. While helping release games, they also wanted to look in their back catalog of film franchises and create new properties, especially with the new generation of systems coming up. The first choice was an easy one, as the newly reimagined Mummy franchise starring Brendan Fraser was a smash success. So we got The Mummy Returns for the PS2 in 2001, and The Scorpion King Rise of the Akkadian for the PS2 and GameCube in 2002, with help of Blitz Games and Point of View Inc. respectively. Neither game did particularly well, though The Mummy Returns had a much better consumer reception. The other film from their catalog they decided to look at during this time was kind of a surprise, the 1982 now classic The Thing. To bring this game to life, they merged with Vivendi Games and partnered with Computer Artworks to make it happen. Computer Artworks had only released Evolva in 2000. Evolva had mostly good reception and impressed Vivendi enough for them to contact Computer Artworks. Computer Artworks sent in a demo where they changed one of their levels to an all ice and snow one to show what they wanted the main game to look like. This was enough and they were given the green light. The Thing was released for Windows on August 20th, 2002, with the Xbox and PS2 ports coming out on September 3rd and September 10th of the same year. Planned releases on the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance were designed, but ultimately scrapped, and man oh man do I want to see those, jank and all. The game was reviewed well across the board on all three systems, and sold over 1 million copies, in addition to getting nominated for a handful of year-end awards. The game opens with CCTV footage of someone clad in military gear searching the inside of a building when he comes across someone who is clearly medical personnel. The medic speaks Norwegian and both men are brutally killed by a horrifying creature as the feed is cut and we hear a man laughing like a mad scientist. It cuts to an aerial view of a blown up camp and Captain Blake is getting his marching orders from Corporal Whitley. Those orders? To investigate the American camp and then rendezvous with Alpha Team at the Norwegian camp. Blake and team wander the burned-out ruins of the U.S. Outpost No. 31 and come across plenty of signs of death and destruction, as well as a tape recording from R.J. McCready and even a half-built UFO. After a trip to the infirmary and still no answers, Blake comes across a frozen corpse belonging to Childs, with no other survivors and no answers. Whitley chimes in, and his new orders to Blake are to blow up the camp's remains with C4 and help the now radio-silent Alpha Team at the other camp. The Norwegian camp offers more bodies and even strange creatures to fight, but no explanation. Only scared members of the Alpha Team with stories of creatures that attacked with no notice. Blake finally runs into Captain Pierce, who oversaw Alpha. Pierce insists that Blake take a blood test to prove he's human. While Blake passes the test confidently, the mechanic and medic he brought along both transform into hideous Man-Thing monsters, and Blake must shoot and burn them with the help of Pierce. The two men are separated, and Blake attempts to find the final survivors of Alpha Team and get into the radio room to send out an SOS. After a massive battle with multiple fleshy variations of the monsters, Blake and his two new teammates from Alpha discover a lone soldier stealing the radio and heading out to the weather station. While in pursuit, the two companion soldiers are revealed to be infected and attempt to kill Blake. He destroys them both and finds Pierce in the weather tower, now convinced he is infected. Rather than suffer the change, he turns the gun on himself and sadly proves himself wrong. Blake finds Collins, who is stuck in the top room of a massive warehouse, and the two agree they need to track the unidentified man, who Collins saw run into the basement area under this very building. Collins doesn't make it. Do you see a theme?
We're screwed!
And the mystery man erupts into a massive abomination that guards the radio Blake needs. After a hectic battle, Blake finds a massive labyrinth of underground tunnels and rooms that he discovers to be a lab, where a team of scientists working for Gen Inc. are studying the creatures, now known to be alien organisms, and looking for possible military purposes. The head scientist is Faraday, and Blake sets out for answers. Blake rescues Faraday, who explains that his team was overpowered and outsmarted by the alien creatures, and before the two can leave, they are double-crossed by Corporal Whitley, who tranquilizes Blake and takes them both to a new facility. Whitley shoots Faraday, and Blake escapes to find this facility is also overrun. While finding a way out, Blake learns that his DNA is resistant to the alien DNA, and that Whitley is the head of a project to use the spread of the thing as biological warfare. Whitley injected himself with the tweaked DNA to attempt to cure his cancer, and now has gone off the rails. Blake finds survivors along the way on his fight to stop Whitley, and is forced to battle past all manner of thing creatures, as well as the Black Ops team led by Whitley. Eventually, Blake takes out a dog creature and helps blow up the cargo planes that Whitley was planning to use to spread the virus. Catching up to Whitley, Blake blows up a barrel next to him, igniting in what should have been a fatal encounter. Whitley shrugs it off and explains he is nearly invincible and even able to control the cells in every man on the continent before running into an even bigger UFO. Whitley transforms into an enormous tentacle thing, and Blake hops into a helicopter with a familiar face. After blowing up the controlling monster, Blake and the pilot, RJ McCready, fly off into the credits. The Thing is a third-person shooter. While you can go into a first-person view for combat, you spend the bulk of the game in third person, and honestly, I think it's easier in most situations to just fight in the third-person angle. You get a ton of weapons to dispatch the somewhat limited number of enemy types. Pistols, shotguns, machine guns, sniper rifles, grenades, grenade launchers, and sometimes a mounted machine gun will help you completely destroy smaller enemies and weaker larger ones. For those bigger enemies, you will have a much easier time if you finish them off with one of the two flamethrowers you have in your inventory. Believe me, it's a necessity. The enemies include the Scuttlers, who can pop out of anywhere and are mostly fodder, the Walkers, who can either be a human-sized enemy or a much larger, tougher version that is hard to tell kind of what exactly it is, and the few boss monsters that show up. These forged creatures are kinda samey, unfortunately, in their looks and attack patterns, but do add a little bit of flair when they appear in cutscenes. It's honestly one of my bigger gripes of the game. The Thing can be anything, and it just chooses to repeat these same 4 enemy types throughout the entire game. The final enemy type, however, is one of the hooks of the game, the infected human. The soldiers that kept showing up with Blake are actually NPC characters and can be a medic, a soldier, or an engineer. They are sometimes required to perform a task for you, like repairing a circuit box or computer, and will help you based on a trust system. They can give you medkits or heal other characters in your party. Most characters you run into during play will not trust you immediately. You can give them health, ammo, or weapons to gain that trust, or use one of the cooler items in the game, the portable blood test kit. This will show them that you are not infected and is one of the many cool nods to the movie that the developers threw in. Quite often, these soldiers will begin to turn into the Walker Thing creatures at points during the game, either through scripted events or from their characters breaking down from the action being too intense. Ultimately, the game devolves a bit into a generic shooter when you go up against Whitley's soldiers, but with only a handful of Thing creature designs, it makes sense to break it up. The game does a pretty good job of taking some of the isolation and paranoid themes from the film. Being a direct sequel, and with Universal's full support, the team was able to use story bits from the film for the game. When alarms go off, they are directly from the film. As this is my all-time favorite movie, I was absolutely blown away. It really added to the immersive feel the game can have. The creatures are unnerving, but unfortunately, they lose their luster the 10th or so time you see them. To make up for this, the game does a good job of throwing jump scares in, and this is where the randomness of the NPCs turning into a creature and coming for you take hold.
Together.
The atmosphere mostly works, and while it isn't always scary, the amount of love and care the developers put into it make it a must-play for genre fans, especially fans of the film. John Carpenter himself even shows up in likeness for Dr. Faraday, and, well, at least for the first scene, his dialogue too. In addition to Carpenter, the only other name actor is William Davis, also known as the cigarette-smoking man from The X-Files. Blake's actor does a fine job, but he kinda sounds like Clint Eastwood trying to be R.J. McCready from the film. And the dialogue is what you'd expect from a 2002 video game.
My men are dying out there. I've seen firsthand what this infection is capable of.
The difficulty of the game, especially on hard mode, also adds to the fear and tension, as you can set yourself up for failure by missing shots or getting teammates killed. Enemies also take more ammo to kill, and you can get surrounded pretty quickly. For players going through their first playthrough, it will have you feeling tense most of the time. Although the game sold well, that generation of systems is where it stayed. Planned sequel was scrapped, and Computer Artworks never released another game. The game itself is stuck in the gaming systems from now 3 generations ago. The PC version isn't available on GOG or Steam, and it's a pain to get working on current consoles. Re-releases can be tricky with games based on movie properties, as those movies' ownership can change hands or agreements can't be made. While we probably won't see another release or game based on the franchise, this one's worth tracking down if you have the system and the time.
Fuck you too!
Thanks for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Horror Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We're an independent company and we appreciate all your support.